After the American Revolution, the 13 colonies came together and they became states. 12 of them went to a constitutional convention. Rhode Island decided to sit it out. Now, the framers met at this convention. It wasn't really a constitutional convention. We call it that in Philadelphia. They were trying to fix the Articles of Confederation because states were issuing their own currency, they were making their own foreign policy, they were raising their own armies, they were obstructing trade and commerce among the states, and on and on and on. Meanwhile, because of the war that went on a long 8.5 years, the national government, such as it was, and it wasn't much, was absolutely broke. And they had no way to raise taxes for an army, or for anything, for that matter, for much. Couldn't even pay their generals and the troops that had fought in the war. So the colonies decided, then states, new states, to get together and fix things. They decided they were going to adopt a constitution. They decided there were certain things that only a central government could do, and all the rest of the stuff should be left to the individual and, from a governing point of view, to the states. So with some significant detail, they laid out what this new federal government would look like, what areas it could operate in. These are called enumerated powers. And left all the other powers to we the people in the states. What's also interesting is they didn't create this federal government with these enumerated powers because they were concerned about liberty. They did it because they wanted to preserve liberty. And so the federal government would set foreign policy, would have the power to raise armies and a navy, would issue the currency, would determine diplomacy and so forth. And yet that federal government wouldn't speak with one voice. It would have many voices. So the Constitution has different articles. We have a Congress, we have an executive, we have a judiciary. 3 branches of government. A lot of great thinkers came up with the idea, but particularly Montesquieu. And they borrowed that notion of divided government, balanced, competing branches of government from Montesquieu. Now, the Constitution was ratified, but there were a lot of big battles in the states of whether or not they should ratify it. And so what happened was 3 of the biggest proponents, 3 of the Federalists, decided that they would write under pseudonyms to promote the ratification of this new Constitution in the states. And we call those essays that were published in various newspapers the Federalist Papers. John Jay, Hamilton, Madison. Mostly Hamilton. They were the authors of the Federalist Papers. And by the way, there were anti-Federalist papers, which I've read at great length too. So there were great debates going on in the states. This thing wasn't ratified right off the bat. In Pennsylvania, the story's told that in order to get the legislature to ratify the Constitution, the proponents locked the doors to the assembly to make sure that some of the state delegates wouldn't leave so they'd still have a quorum and they could get a vote. And there were other instances of various unusual procedures in the states. But they ratified the Constitution, some faster than others. Delaware is called the first state because Delaware ratified it first. So these states were committed to this Constitution. And new territories that wanted to come in to this new country had to also declare faith and allegiance to this Constitution. as a condition of being part of this society. And they did. Now, shortly after the Constitution was ratified by the states, they felt there were some weaknesses. Among those who felt there were weaknesses were George Mason of Virginia. Mason voted against the Constitution. And he voted against it. He was anti-slavery, but he just thought that there wasn't enough in the Constitution to protect the individual from the federal government. Others voiced some concerns, too. So they drew up 12 amendments to the Constitution and sent them to the states for ratification. They were argued out just as well, 10 of which were adopted shortly after the original ratification of the Constitution. Those 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights. If you want to change the Constitution, there are 2 procedures. The Constitutional Convention route, which has never been used, ever, and the supermajority route, where Congress, with a supermajority, passes an amendment, then sends it to the states, where 3/4 need to ratify it. It is a process that is rarely used today, hasn't been used a few decades, because we now have a living and breathing Constitution that can be amended by 5 justices of the Supreme Court or a bureaucracy claiming to act under the Constitution. That's called lawlessness. That's called rogue government. And that's also why we conservatives are originalists. We look at the Constitution, and we try to read it in the context of the time when it was ratified. I've given this example before. You have a mortgage. You sign that loan agreement. There's certain conditions and terms. You're expected to comply with it, and the bank or the mortgage company is expected to comply with it too. So it's predictable, so everybody understands what's going on. Your eyes are open as you agree to a certain arrangement. You don't have a living and breathing loan, do you? You don't have a living and breathing mortgage. That would be preposterous. A living and breathing mortgage that changes with the times. Now, you can amend the mortgage. You can try and have aspects of it change by going back. But you don't just say, you know what, this doesn't mean what it says at the time that it was written and we signed on. It means something different because I'm in a different position today than I was before. That's a joke. Well, how is it not a joke when it comes to the greatest law in our land, which is the Constitution? Why is it accepted? Every phrase in the Constitution is up for grabs if you can just get 5 justices to vote that way. The Constitution is the most brilliant governing document ever devised, which is why it is under constant attack by the left. They don't want stability. They don't want predictability. They want to pick and choose which parts of the Constitution to apply and how to read them. And that's why they're lawless and dangerous and promote illegitimate government. Now you know.